Today we're going to be talking to Kyle Kotaich from Deschutes Brewery. He is a senior data analyst. Hello, Kyle.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
And we're also talking to Ted Combs. He is a food and beverage industry principal at OSIsoft. Hello, Ted.
Hello.
Great. Well, let's start by just asking, Kyle, can you go ahead and introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your work and Deschutes Brewery?
Yeah, Deschutes Brewery is a family and employee-owned independent craft brewery. We're based in Bend, Oregon. Started in 1988 with our brew pub in downtown Bend. Later on, in the late 90s, we commissioned a production facility where we craft and package iconic and trusted brands like Mirror Pond Pale Ale, Black Butte Porter, Fresh Squeezed IPA, and Fresh Haze IPA. And in in 2000, we opened the Portland Public House, which is a functioning brew pub and serving delicious food. I came to Deschutes 6 years ago, made the decision to change careers from the materials research and development industry. I landed at Deschutes as a brewer, got to know the brewing process, the equipment, and the people very well. And around that same time, we invested in the pie system. And I took an interest in data collection and what we could do with that information to improve our processes and efficiencies to meet consumer demand with the constraints of our capital equipment. And as well as reduce waste and increase energy efficiency.
Before we talk about your operations environment and some of the successes you've had, could you spend a little bit of time just outlining the environment, maybe the reference architecture for us, just so we have an idea of what you have there?
Sure. Our primary SCADA system is Emerson Delta V, which we use for our brew house and cellaring operations. We also utilize the inductive ignition platform sort of as an MES layer for our packaging operations. Of course, Pi system is our primary plant historian. We also have an ERP system based on the Microsoft Nav platform, and we also have a few homegrown databases for manual data collection. Those we use in Ignition UI for that manual entry, and actually more recently we've started to use the Pi Web API service to write manually entered data directly to Pi tags.
Okay. If I understand correctly, you had done some things that were really kind of a new approach to solving problems. You know, the typical discussion of how to improve operational efficiency, maybe where people were basing things on assumptions rather than data, and you made a change to that. Can you describe what that was all about?
Sure. More recently, as our asset framework has kind of come into maturity, that data and information as well as the analytics is widely available. And one of the issues that I noticed being a part of problem solving sessions was we would call a meeting, everyone would kind of have assumptions or pre-formulated opinions, and usually that kickoff meeting was sort of a whiteboard discussion, people sharing their opinions, and really action items were created based on consensus. And for some of the more complex problems that we're trying to tackle now directly related to either equipment malfunction or general process inefficiency that spans multiple pieces of equipment or process cells in our production facility, it just was going to be very, very inefficient for us to tackle those advanced problems in that fashion. I made the decision to lead a problem-solving session directly related to our flow meter accuracy. And my thought was, if I could come into this meeting with a data set that already had been, partially analyzed, would I be able to present that data in a way where everyone in that meeting, all the key stakeholders, would have the same idea of what is going on and what could we do with that? And I think the results from that have been very productive. It's decreased our meeting count, which I think everybody is okay with for sure. And also, too, I think we were able to come up with a root cause in a matter of days versus a matter of months. So I think that while this was really the first and second time we've taken this approach, I think that everybody that was involved appreciated and is excited about it, and it is a culture change. So we'll see where it goes.
Okay, so culture change is key there. What was it like getting buy-in from operations?
Yeah, I think the first major project that we really had to seek out sort of global buy-in from multiple departments was for our fermentation prediction project, using an AI model to predict phase changes or specific points of operator intervention in our fermentation process. And the model itself is processing years worth of data in order to effectively give us valid outputs. So while we were presenting, the benefits and the functionality of this project, a lot of the feedback I got from individuals was, well, I'd like to see the data to make sure that the model is doing what we expect. And like I said, a human processing years worth of data is not really feasible, at least in a short time span. So I think the challenge for us as the operations technology group was, what can we do to provide the validation using the same data, but then also going further to prove that this predictive model would be able to function in for our future fermentations. So using statistical methods and simulation, we were able to show that there's some error associated with specifically the diacetyl measurement taken in our beer. We're trying to reduce diacetyl below a specification limit. Our gas chromatography measurements have a defined error or uncertainty with that measurement. Our goal was to show, using the previous predictive models, can we simulate how the model reacts to measurements being added to our data set, and how close it was within that instrument uncertainty at that predicted endpoint at previous entries. So in the end, we were able to show for fermentations that had already happened, we were definitely within instrument uncertainty, which is what you would obviously want from a model. So then taking it one step further, we, the pretty common technique, split the data set, retrain the model on only half, and then present the half that it had never seen before. And what were the results? They were almost identical. So I think at that point, when we were able to create a report that showed those statistics, I think at that point, folks realized, hey, this is a real viable solution for some of the issues that have been kind of like laboring us, or have been difficult to solve based on just the nature of, taking a manual measurement and the requirements for a technician to be there.
Are there any results you can describe at this point?
Yeah, specifically pertaining to the predictive models, once we were able to get the buy-in from our quality and brewing departments, we kind of went into phase 2 and looked at how we could use the outputs from the predictive model with our process automation to essentially automatically advance these fermentations. So we were creating more beer more consistently in less time. And that was a project that started around this time last year. So we're about a year into having a fully automated system. We do have safeguards where it is up to a quality technician to, for any particular vessel, say, yes, I'd like to use the prediction on this one. But since we implemented that, I think we're at about 25% of all of our fermentations over this last year have been cooled using our AI model, our machine learning model. As a result, we're able to use our predictive model more frequently, which is saving us time, ultimately giving us higher quality and consistency of our product, which then gets passed to the consumer. So we're really excited to see continued results from that project.
Okay. I understand you've been able to do something with a prediction model to reduce the peak load on your chillers. Can you describe that?
Sure. So the last step in our fermentation process is cooling the beer down, and we use cold glycol around the vessel jackets. We circulate that to cool the beer down, but we only start that process once our diacetyl levels are within specification. So one of the issues that we were having when our quality technicians would come in and take samples from our active fermentations is that would be sort of a bulk addition. All the samples would get taken at our morning or afternoon times, analyzed, and then entered. Based on those results, that technician would then go and cool all of the tanks that had crossed the spec limit. And what we started to see is in our glycol system, we have a more modern screwhead chiller, and our backup chiller is a very, let's just say, end-of-life reciprocating chiller that needs to be replaced. And we were trying to, time that with our downtime would be significant if we didn't have that backup chiller, because we were surpassing the peak load that our primary chiller could handle. So as we were thinking about how we could solve this problem, one of the conversations that came up is, look, on some of these larger 30,000 gallon fermentation vessels that we have, they take around 18 hours to fill from the brew house as a series of seven separate brews. So what we would want to see is that natural stagger in our fermentations, specifically in those vessels. And we were able to use the predictive model to show if we are able to get away from the manual measurements, at least for the critical transition points, the cooling times would also follow that natural stagger of our fermentation start times, which would then reduce our peak chiller load significantly, and that would allow us to potentially hold off on replacing the backup chiller while we could develop a plan that wouldn't, put us in a situation where our entire fermentation cellar was down for an extended period of time. And that, I think, really maybe pulled the lever to start using the prediction outputs more frequently. And we were able to use the predictions in combination with some additional controls modification to monitor the peak load of the chiller, and to delay that project for at least a year.
Wow. So significant results from a capital expenditure standpoint. One of the things that strikes me is, and we've seen this for years and years in consumer products, food and beverage, is that a lot of smaller brands, smaller companies have come on the scene and been able to compete effectively. And I think it really started in the microbrew space, yeah. I mean, you guys are competing effectively against the Goliaths out there, and we know who they are. And I've said for a long time that I think technology can level the playing field. Yeah, a lot of people when they think about microbrews, and I know you guys aren't small, you're very large and successful, but they wonder about certain things, and then they're pleasantly surprised when the quality of that product is consistent and it's good. So it sounds like you all are really leveraging technology very, very effectively. Another thing I find interesting about relatively smaller businesses is their ability to be agile. And COVID-19 has changed all of our lives significantly, and personally, in many cases professionally. And I would imagine in the beer business, you guys are sitting here trying to deal with the fact that so much less of your product is being consumed on premise in a bar or restaurant, if you will, and now at home that has to reverberate throughout your business. So is that affecting you? Is there anything you're doing about that, or trying to do about that from a technology standpoint in this space?
Yeah, what you said about consumption of craft beer has been on the rise for the last decade. Massive growth in that sector, and with COVID-19, what we saw was a majority of that consumption was on premise or at bars, draft beer, and with COVID-19, a lot of states having mandates to stay at home, consumers were purchasing more packaged products, specifically cans. I think canned craft beer, again, has been in high demand over the last 3 or 4 years. And what that meant for us was we might have potential supply chain shortages of just cans. And what that kind of came to for us at Deschutes was, look, like, either we're going to have extended lead times to get our printed cans, or we might not be able to get certain ones altogether. So we need to come up with waste savings, at least on, specifically for our canned products, and make sure that every barrel of beer that we produce is of the highest quality and gets into package efficiently, so we can meet the demand of our fans.
Yeah. So hypersensitive, critically important that you eliminate the waste and produce as much as you can efficiently and effectively, maybe is a better expression, into the cans. Otherwise, you just don't want to waste any, right? It's basically
right. Yeah.
So is the pie data then that's helpful and contributing to that?
Absolutely. One of the more recent projects that we've been working on is an OEE model for our can line, and that's all done in the pie system. And it's allowed us to identify some of the pain points specifically for can loss, but also down sort of hidden or micro stops and hidden downtime coming from that line that allows us to run more efficiently from a production standpoint, but also from a staffing standpoint. I think one of our goals at Deschutes, specifically surrounding COVID, is our key personnel, such as packaging operators, brewers, and quality technicians, while they're fundamental for the manufacturing that we do, we really need to make sure that they have a safe and healthy work environment. So if we can limit the downtime and get through our production as efficiently as possible, that in turn is less time that necessitates them being in the plant, and allows them to work from home a little bit more.
Nice. Great success story. It sounds like you're probably getting a lot of recognition at your company for having a big impact. Which makes me wonder, what's next? What are you thinking about next in your organization with regards to the impact or areas where you can bring some more improvement? Because you probably have some pretty receptive managers there, I would guess.
Yeah, I think that as the Pi system has evolved, like I said, our asset framework comes into maturity, and the the data and information that we're able to supply is more visible across our enterprise. I think that there are a lot of opportunities, and one of the more recent topics that I've been exploring is how we could leverage edge devices for some of our utilities, like air compressors, which would enable us to do more condition-based maintenance rather than scheduled maintenance on those pieces of equipment. And then our Portland pub is in need of controls overhaul. We definitely want to have a Pi interface at that location, and then that would truly make us enterprise-wide Pi historian. And I think the Edge data store from OSIsoft would be a viable solution for us for the Portland pub.
One of the things I noticed in your presentation at Pi World is there's Pi Vision displays that people were making use of. Actually, let me go ahead and show people the slides right now. Is that something that people were able to develop on their own? Is this something you put together for them? Or how would you say the reception of Pi Vision's been for people wanting to look at their data?
Our philosophy specifically around Pi Vision is that anyone in the enterprise should have that read-only access to our Pi system and operations data. And we enable anybody with a Deschutes Brewery login to access Pi Vision and build and share displays. I think that having that capability on a web-based platform has allowed us to share information peer-to-peer and really use that sort of single source of truth for our operations data. And to date, I think that Pi Vision has been critical for a lot of problem-solving efforts at Deschutes Brewery, and most people tend to pull up Pi Vision when they have a question that they want answered.
Okay. I'm just curious, have you been able to make use of any of the AF features like templates and especially templates with regard to notifications where you can scale up for a device, develop a template, develop a notification based on the template, then scale it out like crazy. Have you done any of that?
Notifications, we have notifications that alert myself and other critical operations technicians when we have a critical system down. One of them actually being our Delta V system. If we lose connectivity, we'll get an alert. That's more at the interface level. We also have at our packaging PLC level the same type of notifications configured. Currently, I would like to implement some notifications for our key processes, such as if our yeast disposal pressure that in that line gets too high, it can send a notification, that process needs to stop. I think we handle a lot of our operations functionality with a good alarming and monitoring philosophy. So for us, the Pi system notifications are effective for communicating when we have systems that may be offline.
Yeah, we see that a lot. Well, supervisory, it absolutely excels at that. So many people have other alert systems they do for the operations, for the control network. So, but okay, good to see. What about tag tuning? I know have you been involved in the nitty gritty of actually, getting data that people can rely on? And do you have any advice for people on tag tuning?
Yeah, when we first started configuring Pi tags, most of that work was done by various individuals, and a lot of the parameters were set as default. It was more about getting those connections and getting that sort of baseline data. As our analytics has evolved, what I've realized is, that might be sufficient for certain tags, but really we can improve the efficiency of our data archive if we limit, say, the status of a fermentation vessel. It only changes maybe once every 3 days. If we can, decrease our archiving on that, then that might afford us a little more granularity with tags such as our flow rate through our clarification centrifuge. So I think having that balance and knowing what you want to get from the pi tags is really important. And that comes back to knowledge of the process as well.
Great, great. So Kyle, can you tell me a little bit more about the models you use in fermentation?
Sure. We have 2 models that we currently utilize. One is the actual rate of fermentation, and then we have another model that is the rate of diacetyl reduction. Ultimately, those 2 butt up against each other in terms of the fermentation phases, so there is some dependency there. And I think the next steps for us is to go from a single variable, which is looking at apparent degree of fermentation over time or diacetyl concentration over time, and start to look at a multivariate system. So how the rate of fermentation, potentially temperature and yeast strain affects the rate of diacetyl reduction. So I think that we have some growth that can occur specifically in our predictive models. And I think that ultimately the goal is really the value we can get from them is that predictability in our fermentation, which is sort of the longest phase or portion of the craft beer manufacturing process. If we can accurately predict when a batch of beer is going to be ready to go through clarification and packaging, that will help our production planning and ultimately our supply chain. We talked about longer lead times or potential shortages for packaging products from our suppliers. So if we can develop a better production plan using our predictive models, we might be able to avoid shortages in that way.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much. Thanks for elucidating about the supply chain. That's great to see that this is having a positive impact. As we normally do, what I'd like to do is have a real quick lightning round. Ted, if you had anything else you wanted to ask, please cue it up. But here, first of all, where do you normally work? Do you work at a physical site, or do you work in a resource center or downtown offices? Where do you normally work?
I'm on site at our production facility in Bend, and my office is in somewhat of a closet above the boiler. So I'm happy to be working from home.
Okay, so I guess normally steel-tip boots, fireproof clothing, that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's pretty comfortable. I made it sound worse than it is.
Okay, but if you're on,
windows here.
I'm sorry, what was that?
I have windows here.
Oh,
yeah.
Nice. So okay, so you're on site. What kind of animals normally wander on site in Deschutes?
We have a lot of deer that are on our campus, especially now. And I've seen quite a few quail, rabbits, and rock chuck.
Oh, very cool, very cool. So if you're on site, what's the prettiest view you have? See, nobody knows that. Nobody gets it in operation. Sometimes you just don't see anywhere else. What's the best view, and what are you looking at?
The best view from our production facility is on top of our cellar 3 or 30,000 gallon fermentation vessels on the exterior of the building. I actually think that those are the highest, with the exception of the smokestacks in the old mill. I think it's the highest point in Bend, and so you have a great view of the river and the mountains and just the entire Central Oregon area.
Very cool. Very cool. So what's the first computer you ever used?
It was an old Macintosh back in elementary school. I remember playing Oregon Trail on the old floppy disk.
Right. Yes. Very cool. And you were actually in Oregon. Well, that's a.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you.